Cool. So hi everyone. Not going to go into too much about who I am because I'm sure you've seen, obviously there's this slide and then I'm sure you've seen the agenda as well. My name is Adnan. I'm the education officer across the road from Birmingham at Leicester Students' Union. And I also have the pleasure or displeasure, depending on how you see it, of sitting on the National Scrutiny Committee of the NUS. I've basically been doing work around decolonising the curriculum ever since we became a SAB last year. I also sat on the committee of the Black Students Campaign last year as well. So I've always kind of been involved around this sort of work. Obviously, I think it's worth highlighting that this sort of work is obviously very, very important. And it's very, very important that we get it right. But also in doing so, I want to establish that everyone will be kind of on different journeys and levels of understanding that, in terms of grasping this sort of content. And I think this space specifically, I think making mistakes is okay in this space as well, so long as we're willing to learn from them and learn from others as well. Spare me a minute, sorry, I'm just shutting the door. Okay, cool. All right, so I'll get started. I should say as well, before I continue, feel free to just drop in your thoughts whenever, raise a hand. I don't just want this, I just chat a little breeze, to be honest. So feel free to just, chuck in your thoughts in the chat, throw your hand up, whatever. Cool, so these are just what I wanted to go through. What do you mean by decolonising the curriculum? Why is it important? Some case studies I had, which will be quite interactive, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on them. The difference between decolonisation and diversity, and the problem of conflating the two. When we talk about decolonising education, the need to move beyond just the curriculum. Whilst this is focused mainly on the curriculum, I do want to touch a bit upon how we move beyond just the curriculum as well. How do we actually do it? What can you do? What we're doing at Leicester, I thought I'd touch on that briefly. Some campaigns and events that are currently ongoing nationally, and how you can get involved, and some recommended reading as well. I should say actually, so these slides is I've done this normally for like student reps are SU at Leicester. So they are very directed towards student reps, SABs, and so on and so forth. There are some things that might be quite specific to Leicester, so don't worry if you don't know anything or if you're not quite sure what a fact or statistic is there. But yeah, feel free to drop any thoughts or questions in the chat. Hang on, my screen's a bit frozen. Oh, there we go. Oops. Right. So in terms of actual disciplines, this is probably like the best discipline best definition rather that I found. Generally, definitions of decolonisation, they're quite inaccessible and there's a lot of academic jargon. This is the one that I found most easy to understand. So to decolonize the curriculum is to enhance the way we learn and what we learn. It is to complement what is already in our curriculum with a multiplicity of perspectives, traditions, and approaches from different regions, historical contexts, and academic disciplines. Fundamentally, it seeks to challenge, complement, and critique the inherently romanticized Eurocentric nature of our curriculum. It is to present history for what it is and encourage critical thought. Now, I don't think this is the best definition by any means, but I do think this definition is quite good in trying to make clear in a nutshell what we mean by it. But it's obviously, I don't think it's the be all and end all. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat about what you think of this definition. If you have any other definitions which you think are better, I'd be keen to know as well. So what do we actually mean by it? Does anyone actually know who Cecil Rhodes is? Feel free to drop it in the chat. So yeah, I mean, drop it in the chat, otherwise raise a hand or something. But if not, what I will say is, so basically Cecil Rhodes, long story short, so he's linked. So there is a statue of him at Oxford University, so it's linked to this. So basically, Cecil Rhodes was a British imperialist businessman who kind of oversaw the vast colonization of land in the southern region of the continent of Africa. And he was like, the building block. He kind of set forth the legacy for apartheid. And essentially in South Africa, you had the rise of, sorry, my slides are being a bit slow. You had the rise of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, which actually links to what was being said about Oxford as well. So there were statues in South Africa. You've got them in Oxford as well that are commemorating Cecil Rhodes and almost glorifying him. And what activists in South Africa saw this as was it symbolized sort of a commemoration of everything he stood for, but it was also symbolized what our education system kind of glorifies and romanticizes. And so it was kind of born out of this movement in South Africa. Obviously, generally, it is about tackling assumptions in our curriculum, which put the West on a pedestal to the rest. And a lot of decolonizing education is about critiquing and challenging assumptions in our curriculum. One example I always like to use, those of you who study geography at any level, really, you may have come across this developed world and developing world binary that separates the global north, i.e. the West, and the global south. And it kind of suggests that one is inferior to the other without any kind of mention of how the historical injustice of colonialism created global disparities we see today. Sorry, 1 minute. Right, so why is it important? So yeah, to ensure an inclusive and representative curriculum, diversity of also diversity ideas, so as to have a wholesome education. Now, like I say, I'll go into this a bit later, but I hesitate to use the word diversity in any way, shape, or form. But if I had to sum it up as simply as I possibly can, it is about there's no point in you having a diversity of authors if there isn't like a diversity of ideas, which one challenge the mainstream models of thinking and learning, but also challenge the mainstream ways of actually teaching someone or empowering someone to learn. So I think that's in a nutshell what I'm trying to get at. Also ensure that our curriculum is constantly challenging prejudice and bigotry as opposed to inadvertently enabling this. And in essence, it's about having like anti-racist pedagogy. So for those who don't know what pedagogy is, even my definition of it is a bit scratchy. So there's probably someone there who might know what it is better than me. But my understanding is very much like the methodology of learning and teaching, and developing a methodology of learning and teaching which is anti-racist. It's constantly challenging forms of domination. And yeah, I mean, I will go into this a bit later, but we'll find is particularly the study of science as well, historically, is founded on the subjugation and exploitation of vast communities of color in the global south, particularly Black communities. And yeah, so obviously this stat is for Leicester, but it's relevant to all institutions across higher education. But does anyone actually know what the Black Asian minority ethnic attainment gap or awarding gap is? You can drop it in the chat or wherever. So in essence, it is the gap between the number of white students being awarded a 2-1 or above, the number of BAME students being awarded a 2-1 or above. Now, more often than not, you'll see generally the term attainment gap being used across universities. I hesitate, and generally at Leicester we hesitate to use that word purely because attainment puts the onus on the student. Why are you not attaining a 2-1 or above sort of thing? But actually, if we would reframe it as awarding, the onus is put on the institution, and the institution is forced to kind of challenge what kind of structural factors play into this disparity. Because we kind of at Leicester, we kind of the more you say attainment, the more you put the onus on the student, the more you feed into the deficit model, and the more you kind of inadvertently enable this idea that somehow white students are inherently more, academically inferior to their counterparts of color. And that's obviously not true. There are inherent structural racism within the higher education sector and different factors which feed into this gap. And yeah, so 85 or 87% of white students as of 2019. And the black awarding gap, what you'll find is far, far bigger than the BME awarding gap across the institutions. And again, that's I think important. It's easier said than done, but it is important for us to break down the awarding gap as much as possible. The biggest disparities you will almost always find are between black and white students, structurally speaking. And even within that as well, I'm not going to go into it too much because my expertise is limited on it, but even within that as well, there's a further breakdown that needs to be looked at. Studies have shown like there's a difference between those students who are of Black African origin compared to those who are of Black Caribbean origin, and there's a difference there. There's also class plays into it, so on and so forth. But it's important that we try and break this down as much as possible in order to actually try and alleviate it. Yeah. And yeah, like, it is this whole kind of sense of belonging. Fundamentally, it's about incredibly diverse in communities, seeing themselves, their whole histories and self-defined narratives in the curriculum. I'll be very honest with you. I find this stuff a bit wishy-washy, and I think it's important that we actually interrogate what we mean by this, and not just have like these plasters of tape on the issue. But yeah, we'll go into that a bit more. So this is a case study I had. And often, I kind of alluded to earlier, often, the concepts of decolonisation and diversity are conflated, when in reality, there are two entirely different concepts and approaches. I was going to give you about five to 10 minutes to give a read of this, this excerpt of an article I found. And when it comes to measuring health, obviously body mass index, BMI numbers are widely regarded as objective determinants of one's health. Given the historical developmental context of BMI as a white European measure, as seen in this article, think about what the implications of this are on, the way health is taught in our institutions, but also the way health is kind of measured in our institutions of public health. And how might we approach this through the lenses of diversity and decolonisation? I might just give 5 minutes. I'll leave it on this slide for a bit. I have a couple more after this, and give it a read. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat or just raise your hand. I'd be really interested to know. Yeah, I saw a question in the chat. Do I have a link? Sorry, we don't need the link to the article. If you just take a read of just this excerpt on the slide, I can send you a link after the session. But yeah, just take a quick read of this excerpt because I don't want to give the entire article because it might take up all our time. I will definitely send it across if anyone wants it at the end of this. Yes, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mikey Barnes has made the point, and it's a very good point. If medicine students and society as a whole are taught that BMI is a neutral measure of health, given that BMI does not accurately reflect the health of people of color, these students will come to see people of color as generally more unhealthy, which may affect the ways they treat their patients, or the stereotypes they hold about these groups of people. Yeah, that's obviously, it's a very valid point, and I think the more you kind of, expand on what you just said, is you begin to realize that actually, it is very much a life or death issue. Um, and if we are not getting these very basic things right, if we're not actively critiquing, questioning every kind of supposed objective norm, particularly in health, then there are life and death consequences. And it's very, very important to get it right. Thank you for that. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this? I was gonna move on in about a minute or so. Um, all right, cool. I'm gonna move on to the next case study. Obviously, feel free, if you still want to drop your thoughts on this one, feel free to keep dropping them. And yeah, I'm just gonna move on to the next one. So the next one, an article has shown that artificial intelligence has a tendency to discriminate against those with darker skin tones, i.e. immigration detection systems are seen in this article. And other examples I've come across, and I'm sure many of you might have come across, is the actual like hand dryers failing to detect those, recognize those with darker skin tones. And I suppose, give a read of this excerpt just on the slide. No need to actually look for the article, just give a read of this excerpt. Ask yourself, feel free to put in the chat as well again, how does this reflect on the study of engineering and the construction of technology? What are the implications of this? And again, pretty similar to before, how thoughts on how approaches of diversity will differ to approaches of decolonisation. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, no, Tom has obviously made the point in the chat as well. It's a good example of how the sciences need to change. Decolonisation is not just limited to the arts, absolutely. Historically, science is what gave colonization its face and supposed legitimacy. So it is definitely important. So Leanne made the point in regards to the previous case study. In terms of diversity versus decolonization, it states BMI was formulated using white European men, therefore is not representative of female health, and the differences between men and women. This is an issue of diversity, but not one of decolonization. It's an interesting point. Obviously, anyone else, feel free to contribute. Let me touch on that actually after this case study, because I just don't want to take up time. Give some time on this case study, and then give my thoughts on that. Some really interesting points being made in the chat around colorism, references to other resources. Thank you for that. It's very helpful. There's a question as well on my advice on the term BAME. Yeah, I might leave that till the end if that's all right. If I forget, just feel free to drop it in the chat as well. But yeah, because we've got some time for questions at the end, hopefully. So yeah. Okay. So not everyone can see. So when you're posting your comments and stuff, it's just if you actually say where it says two, instead of just all panelists, if you put all panelists and attendees, that way everyone can see your comments, because some of you are sending in comments, some very valuable comments that have come to just all panelists. And if we can just where it says two, just put all panelists and attendees when dropping your thoughts in. Thank you. Thank you, Mikey, again. I think in answer to the initial query around how diversity might be more useful in decolonisation here, I would completely agree with what Mikey said. Thank you for that. So I think in this case study, the previous one, diversity could potentially right some of the wrongs with the technologies, but I think a decolonial perspective would allow for a deeper look at how these technologies came to be, what purposes they are useful, and who that serves to benefit. I've nothing further to add, really. I think that's pretty much sums it up. It's very much about tackling the issue at the root. We'll go on to this a bit later, but don't just want to sort of put people within a framework that is inherently designed to, be racist or be, exclusionary. There's no point in doing that, but we'll go into that a bit later. All right, cool. I think we spent a bit of time on this one. I've got one more, and then we'll move on to some other things. So yeah, so this is one last one I had. So this article has shown, by the way, trigger warning. I should establish a trigger warning, and we are briefly going to touch on issues of slavery and Black suffering very briefly, but obviously I understand it's a very sensitive and very traumatic issue, so please feel free to drop out, do what it is you want to do. I don't want to put people in a space where they feel unsafe. But anyway, this article has shown the consequences for students, particularly Black students in this case, being exposed to the brutal oppressive histories of their ancestors with specific reference to slavery. Give a read of this excerpt again on the slide. Ask yourself what the implications of this, what does this say about the way in which slavery is taught and Black history more broadly, what steps could be taken to ensure that spaces of learning are safe for our Black students, and again, similar to before, thoughts on how approaches of diversity will differ to decolonisation. So yeah, I'll give another 5 minutes. Keep the discussion going, guys. I find it really interesting. So please keep it going. Yeah, so Ash made a really valid and helpful point in the chat. I think this can be linked to a colorblind attitude that is often held up as the solve for teaching, but is in fact potentially harmful to students. I think that's a very, very important point. Thank you for that. So yeah, I think people forget often with this work, we cannot center ourselves in this. It's important that we divest our egos from this. So it's important to listen to those who are most marginalized, those who are more marginalized than us, and centering them in this work and their experiences. Because I find often, people feel like, oh no, but I have the answers to this. And the reality is, no one person has the answer or is responsible for any of this work. It's important that we're listening to those who are more marginalized than us and more oppressed than us. and center them in this. So yeah, thank you for that, Ash. A really important point. I'll give it another like minute or two, and then I'll move on. Yeah, so good question. I can't actually remember who wrote this article, but where it says in the slide, this article, for some reason I've had this article, not anyone else, but if you actually click on the article where it says this article, you should be able to find the author. Did the teacher train to be taught in this way? Well, I believe so. If you read the article, she was kind of talking about how, and generally it's a reference, I think, to schools, you know, across the country and world, and even universities as well, about how these sorts of issues are just kind of thrown there without any kind of sensitivity to the fact that this might, you know, affect people. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. I can try and send the links at the end of this slide. Spare me a minute, again, my door's opened. Okay, cool. I'm gonna move on now. But again, keep dropping in your thoughts and your questions, so on and so forth. But yeah. Right. So the importance of decolonisation versus diversity. I think some of you may have come across Angela Davis, who is a prominent activist and academic who's been around for some time now, and she was particularly prominent, you know, during the kind of fight for civil rights in America back in the 60s. But I like this quote by her, and I think it kind of really sums up the issue of diversity and how it is different to decolonisation. So I have a hard time accepting diversity as a synonym for justice. Diversity is a corporate strategy. It's a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way that it functioned before, except now that you have black faces and brown faces, it's a difference that doesn't make a difference. And I think, you know, that I very much subscribe to this idea that somehow, you know, what is the point of having more black and brown faces if they just serve to, you know, create no change, or you know, if you posit it as a sort of silver bullet to issues of race inequity, then it doesn't really address the issue at hand. Really, you just, as Angela Davis put it quite nicely, you're just putting black and brown faces in a system that would just continue to function the way it functioned before. And you know, diversity tends to paper over the cracks, while decolonisation seeks to address systemic oppression at its root and actually seeks to challenge and dismantle these structures of oppression that exist, not just in higher education, but you know, across the globe. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to talk about beyond the curriculum a little bit, and you know, how it's so much more than just the curriculum. So I think you know, divestment is one example where I think we need to kind of incorporate the work a little bit. You know, as a structure and entity, universities historically are inherently colonial. The founding purpose of universities, particularly in the United Kingdom, if you look at what you call like the red brick universities, so the ones that aren't necessarily post-92, although the post-92 universities have a responsibility here as well. The founding purpose of them were to essentially serve empire, and to conduct the research of empire, and to train the future governors of empire as well. And it's very important that we seek to challenge that. So in terms of divestment specifically, you know, we have to be honest with ourselves in that a lot of the structures within the academy are inherently, you know, exclusionary, inherently oppressive. And we need to seek to kind of figure out new ways of learning and teaching. So divestment from the structure, but also divestment financially and materially. Our universities should, in policy in terms, should have what is known as an ethical investment policy. However, universities inadvertently often invest in companies which are complicit either in the climate crisis, which disproportionately affects communities in the global south, making it a race issue, and also companies which, again, enable oppression in the global south, such as the oppression of the Palestinian people in Gaza, for example. And we can't just focus our sights on the curriculum. Universities have global reach, have a global impact, and we need to seek to kind of refine that and make sure it's decolonisation is inherent throughout the work. And we should also kind of think about, I mean, this is something I've had to kind of think about a lot as well as a sabbatical officer, as a student, as a student kind of activist as well, which is like this. Well, often when we talk about decolonisation, I'm just a bit conscious of the way universities co-opt the term. Should they co-opt this term when in fact they don't fully grasp what we mean by it? Are they just using it as a sort of synonym for diversity or any other kind of liberal concept, which doesn't serve to really achieve anything? And so we have to be conscious of that as well. We need to be conscious of the way universities co-opt the term of decolonisation. So it's important that students, students' unions, academics are constantly at the forefront and at the lead of defining what we mean by this, and holding universities to the fore on this. So yeah, there's the hostile environment securitization, dismantling the Islamophobic and oppressive prevent duty. I don't want to go into this too much. There's you can do a whole session on this. I will just give a brief mention to the Federation of Student and Islamic Societies, FOSIS, who do run Islamophobia training, and they do touch on prevent as well. So I would, if you are looking to kind of find out more about this, I'd get in touch with them. But yeah, generally speaking, prevent seeks to securitize expressions / symbols of Islamic worship, as well as securitizing legitimate political dissent to mainstream kind of status quo. Examples being free education protests, people being reported to the duty simply for advocating for things like that, as well as partaking in activism, standing in solidarity with those who are oppressed in Palestine and elsewhere. So it's important that we interrogate how the university feeds into this framework, which constantly seeks to otherize and oppress really communities who don't fit this kind of quite ideal mold. And also we need to kind of challenge constantly seek to challenge the way campuses are seen as borders, and international students are often treated as cash cows and often dehumanized in the process. And I think it's important that they are not seen purely as a market, and we challenge that rhetoric as well as the actions behind it. Ratnadip, apologies if I pronounce your name wrong, but Ratnadip made the point, agreed, and unis or powerful institutions use diversity measures and they like to obfuscate how they are materially contributing to the status quo. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And just one, so this kind of touches on, divesting from the structure. So dismantling oppressive power structures, the very structure of the university can be oppressive, it is oppressive, and we need to kind of think beyond it a little bit as well as working within it. It's not to say that we shouldn't work within it. I think there are things we can achieve within it, and we certainly need to utilize the seats that we have and the spaces that we have within it. But we also have to be frank with ourselves that actually true liberation and true kind of justice will come outside us and beyond this. And part of it really is challenging, marketization, which is inherently seeking to kind of commodify education and, take its value away, and in doing so, treat, students as a market, and staff are kind of subsequently kind of thrown to the wayside a little bit. So we do need to kind of challenge that. And like I said, earlier, briefly before, yes, we do need to move beyond it and build a new, but also do what we can within the system and within, within the kind of the committees and the spaces that we have. There is stuff that we can achieve, but it will never solve the solution at its root, and will only seek to deal with the symptoms. And I kind of touched on it earlier. We do need to kind of dismantle and divest our ego from this work. We won't, as individuals, always have the answer solely as individuals. This work has to outlive us, and we constantly have to seek to, empower those who are more marginalized and oppressed than us, and center them in this work. Sorry, I'm just keeping a track of time. So yeah, move on. In terms of how we actually decolonize the curriculum, and what we can do. Like I said, it's very much targeted at student reps. So if there's anything you're unsure of or anything, just please, my email address will be at the end as well, or just drop it in the chat. But in terms of what it looks like I said earlier, diversity of reading lists and lectures with diversity of ideas, in fact, I would potentially even, challenge the first half of that, the crucial thing is diversity of ideas, which, actively seek to challenge and complement what, in terms of content was already in our curriculum, but also the way in which our learning is conducted. And yeah, so modules which actively challenge and complement mainstream theories, modules and assumptions. And often you'll find, like, whether you're as a student rep, or as a SAB, like, you'll find that universities will have some form of unconscious bias training. Now, I really dislike the word unconscious bias, the term unconscious bias. I think it's really, really bad. I think if you look at, if you actually interrogate what we mean by the term, the minute you kind of undertake unconscious bias training and you become aware of any biases you hold, that is no longer unconscious bias. You become conscious of the bias, supposed bias that you hold. So personally, I just think it's just a way just to kind of, satisfy the egos of some individuals and not put them in positions of discomfort. We should all be put in positions of discomfort at some point. It's the way we grow, it's the way we learn. And I remember an academic by the name of Farah Hassani at Leicester. She made the really, really eloquent point of we need to become comfortable in our discomfort. That's part of how we learn, that's part of how we grow, and that's part of how we kind of change things. So in terms of this specifically, I don't like the term, but utilize it, see what can be done with that training. Are we actively, challenging these issues? Are people's status of power being challenged? And, if you can, try and actually challenge the term itself. I've just seen a comment from Georgina. I feel an increase in diversity is a lot more evident in non-Russell Group universities, which still maintains inequality in the higher education system. Russell Groups have a higher chance of employability, maintaining a white majority in high positions. Is this all deeply rooted within the education system as early as primary school? I know that I was never told about what Russell Group even meant until I went to grammar sixth form. Comprehensive school experience, very different. There's a lot there. If it's all right with you, Georgina, can we'll touch this at the end when we have some questions. I don't want to dismiss your point. I think we'll try and touch on it actually. So please don't feel like I'm dismissing it. Definitely touch on it. But yeah. So like I said, based on the case studies we went into, you need to make sure that medicine, the study of science, and the teaching factors behind it are kind of, taking in the cultural needs and the needs of people of color, and also tackling and dismantling the barriers to research there. And again, coming off, I think it was the last case study, presenting Black history and histories of other colonized communities as a whole, as opposed to just one of slavery, subjugation, and violence. And even with that, making sure trigger warnings before topics such as slavery, colonialism, and violence are being explored. And the question, I think those who are in the powerful position of actively conducting learning and conducting lectures, the question to ask is, are students of color, particularly Black students in the case of slavery, are they in the right mental space to delve into such traumatic history? And we need to be sensitive to that. So simple things like trigger warnings can really, help either prepare students or kind of, they will then know to, okay, I might not partake in this session of learning because I'm not in the right mental space. And I really think this is something going forward that university should seek to adopt as a mitigating circumstance, as it really is fundamentally at the root of who finds our spaces of education safe or not. And I think it's important that we incorporate that. And also in terms of the actual research that is done by universities, and generally with learning as well, like any learning you do, any research that is done, what impact does that have on wider society? We need to ask the questions of who benefits from this research, who loses out. Part of this decolonisation work is about ensuring that learning and research on campus actively reflects on what impact that research has on society and what potential consequences there may be. What is the point of research if it doesn't seek to change anything or doesn't seek to better society in any way, shape, or form? And I think it's important that universities don't become this echo chamber, which are constantly seeking to boost their reputation. Oh, we've got this space center, or we've got this fancy building, or we've got this amazing new research center, without any kind of material, any kind of substance around research and the impact of that research on society. And it's part of the issue of marketization as well, where universities are constantly prioritizing their reputation. In terms of what student reps can do, I don't want to touch on this too much. It's very much directed at course reps and students and student reps. But yeah, like push for regular reviews of reading lists and module content. Sorry, my slides being a bit temperamental. Module reviews during study as well as after. So, I mean, at Leicester, I don't know how it works at Birmingham, but at Leicester, at the end of a module, there's always a module review. But we're trying to push for module reviews during study as well as after, to try and kind of incorporate the change as it goes. And in terms of push for student advocates on school, college, and learning and teaching communities. Not that I see this kind of representation as a silver bullet to the issue, but I think it's important that students have a voice on these very, very important committees, in terms of, because these committees actually play a huge role in terms of the outlay of learning and teaching and the way our learning is done. And in terms of the actual module reviews itself, we need to ask questions of belonging and representation, whether students feel that, but also, do students feel safe in the space of learning? Do they think this space is for them? I mean, these are the questions that we need to ask. That point is relevant to Leicester students only, so ignore that. But also fundamentally, this is at the root, I think, again, of decolonising education. Ask who has and hasn't got access to the learning space you are in. And it could be simple things like, if you're in a lecture, obviously most of us are probably in some sort of virtual learning environment right now, but if we do get back to campus properly, ask yourself like simple things like, does this lecture theatre have wheeled access? Are things like trigger warnings being integrated in the way our lectures are being done? And I think this is at the root of this work, and these are the questions that we need to constantly ask. And in terms of organising with students on your course, there are several different ways to do it. Utilize your students' union here. Students' unions are there, they're your space, they're there to empower you and to help you achieve change. So utilize your students' union, your sabbatical officers, in terms of organising around any issues specific to your course or cohort. And very often, I don't always see these as silver bullets to the issues, but sometimes universities and students' unions, they will run projects and campaigns around this. Try and get involved, try and take the lead on these issues if they do. But yeah, just thought I'd briefly touch upon what we're doing at Leicester. So we're kind of trying to launch a student-led decolonize campaign, which will have 3 strands. One is the curriculum, the other will be divestment, the other will be democratization. And we're going to work with students to kind of build a vision of what we think a decolonized kind of Leicester looks like and what we want from the university. And part of that will be a joint project, hopefully, with the university around curriculum consultancy, where we'll actually seek to financially remunerate students in terms of exploring these issues of decolonisation, particularly in regards to the curriculum. I also provide them with some training around it as well. And every year we have a student leaders conference where we have 2 forms of training which kind of center around this issue of decolonisation and liberation. So that's decolonisation training and grassroots activism training. And in terms of utilising the institution itself, the university will be establishing an institute for inclusivity in higher education, and within that, we want to kind of center decolonial expertise and bring in decolonial expertise to kind of feed into change across the institution. And the Students' Union, we're currently working in the Students' Union to kind of produce resources of political education for students and staff around this issue, because I think it's important. I think often, you know, and it comes back to this point of divesting the ego around this issue. I think often we just assume that with this issue, that if you know it, you know it, and if you don't, you don't, and you just end up kind of excluding people who otherwise might have been potential assets. I think we need to kind of be conscious of the fact that people are at different stages of learning, and that we need to kind of, you know, be sensitive of that, and the difference comes between those who are just not willing to learn and those who are willing to learn. But yeah. Okay, I'll move on from this one short from time. But yeah, in terms of actually campaigns, events, and how to get involved, I'm sure, I know Larissa Kennedy, the NUS president, was here earlier. I'm sure she'll be talking, she just touched on the NUS Decolonise Education campaign. I'm going to give it a shout out as well. They will have a lot of resources for students' unions on how to get campaigns going on your campuses and stuff, so please do utilize that. I think Hillary, the VP Higher Education, is or has been or will be here at some point during this conference, so I'm sure she'll touch on it as well. So I don't want to get into it too much, but that's just a link to that. This is just some recommended reading I had around this issue as broadly as possible. And yeah, feel free to take a photo, whatever, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Just gonna have a look at the time because I know I've been chatting a lot. Okay, I think we've got some time for some questions. So I'm gonna there's already been some questions at the start, so I'm gonna try and address them. And then Tom, if I'm taking up too much time, just let me know because I chat a lot. Okay, so I think the first question earlier, I've forgotten their name, so apologies for forgetting your name. First question was around the term BAME, from what I remember. So my personal opinion of the term BAME, I don't like it. To be quite honest with you, I think it's a very poor term, and is actually quite problematic in terms of it does just homogenize students who aren't racialized as white. And also within that, I think there's a grouping, you know, if you look at who misses out a lot when it comes to, you know, things like BAME student representation or whatever, Black students and those are those, you know, often who are of darker skin are often missing out, and it ends up being a bit of a cop out for universities. So I remember there was a study that was recently, the University of Oxford had said, I can't remember what this, so don't take my facts here for you know, as fact, but from what I can remember very briefly, Oxford University, you know, when the recent intake of students just this year said the BAME student cohort has gone up by like 20% or something. And then when you actually interrogate that and challenge that, what you'll find is within that kind of increase of cohort, it's an overwhelming majority of you know, students who are of East Asian or South Asian origin, particularly Indian within the context of South Asian origin. And it's just like, okay, who is missing out even with that? So I think it does benefit institutions more than, you know, the group of people it's meant to benefit. And we need to kind of challenge the term. Personally, I think we need to move on from it. You have found that I do use people of color a lot, students of color, but even within that as well, I think it's important we acknowledge the structural racism is hierarchical, right? If you look at colonialism and the way colonialism was implemented, they had a hierarchy. Those with the darkest skin were at the bottom of their hierarchy. And it gradually kind of went up and up. And those with the lighter skin were at the top, i.e. white people were at the top. And that is the very nature of white supremacy, right? So I think on that, we have to acknowledge that racism is hierarchical, and we kind of have to move beyond, you know, BAME really is a term, a liberal term put to us by, you know, institutions within the UK. And I do think we need to move beyond it. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. There's a lot of stuff out there that, but I would, if you can, try and, you know, I would recommend moving beyond it. And also, some people say, oh, you might silo these issues. But if you, for example, if you take the awarding gap, the biggest awarding gap is between Black and white students. as opposed to other, students of color and communities of color. But it's a simple principle, really. If you can alleviate the biggest disparities, the smaller disparities will follow. So it's actually in everyone's interest to kind of get at the root of the biggest issues here. Sorry, I'm just trying to get all the questions. Georgina's question, which is, I feel an increase in diversity is a lot more evident in non-Russell group universities, which still maintains inequality in the higher education system. Russell groups have a higher chance of employability and maintaining a white majority in high positions. Is this all deeply rooted within the education system as early as primary school? I know that I was never told about what Russell group even meant until I was into grammar sixth form. It's all deeply rooted within education as early as primary school. Yes, I think the entire education system is inherently racist, starting from the root. I think higher education, what you'll find is with higher education, because generally there is that bigger freedom to kind of explore, and within that kind of small element of freedom, you're able to explore these issues of decolonisation and race and so on and so forth. Whereas with secondary school and primary school, it's a lot more structured, and we inadvertently kind of create this idea that's only relevant to higher education, but actually it's relevant to the entire education system. And to answer your question, yes. It's a big issue, it's a big topic. There's a lot of research out there. And if you just drop me an email, my email is here, just take a note of it, and I will send any resources I have who have better kind of answers to all your questions, which are all very good questions and points. I'm going to move on to the questions. Everyone's made a lot of interesting points, but I'm going to move on to the questions if that's okay, just for the sake of time. Jocelyn, I believe, said, I see discomfort as being applied to those who are more privileged positions, who are discomforted by decolonising frameworks. I think generally, yes, that is the aim. I think it is about challenging people, the way people benefit from, white supremacist structures, and also structures which, inadvertently are there to kind of privilege a certain group above another. So yeah, I guess to answer your question in short. Ash asked the question of, what do you think of divestment from aeronautical engineering companies, arms manufacturers to form decolonising? I can see our uni having issues with this one. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to go into it too much because we might steer off on a tangent, but the arms industry, particularly in the UK, like what you'll find is there are UK arms complicit in wars across the world. So if you take, for example, if you look at the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, an overwhelming number of the country are below the poverty line. They are facing, on the verge of facing extinction. And the UK arms industry, there has been evidence used. There has been evidence that has shown that the Saudi regime has used UK arms to kind of, enact their bombing campaign in Yemen. So absolutely, I think universities need to kind of divest from arms manufacturers, because the more we invest in them, the more we are complicit in their oppressive acts. And it does really create this hierarchy of colonialism, neo-colonialism. And I think, as well as that, also, like, if you look at your careers fairs, are BAE Systems is an arms manufacturer, are they attended to, are they in our careers fairs and stuff like that? So it's, as well as materially divesting, it's also about not providing them with a platform to kind of, legitimize their work. Jocelyn had another question. A question on the use of decolonisation is often critiqued by Indigenous scholars as a need to actually be about giving back land. Given the UK is not really considered to be on stolen land, how would this critique apply here? Well, actually, it's not. I think it's giving back land is symbolic of what is a broader kind of issue, which is reparations. So whilst we're not going to give the UK back to anyone, the UK, the monarchy, all of the very wealth of the UK is founded off the back of slavery, violence, and colonialism. So in terms of giving back land, I think that's symbolic of something broader, which is reparations. And the UK, morally and historically, owes a lot to the global South. So I think that's what I would say it's more about, as opposed to just giving back land directly and specifically. Yeah, loads of different points being made. Yeah, it's just a discussion around that. Current government gets to this. Yeah. Okay, Asad, I asked the question, what are your thoughts about the announcement last week that white privilege is only a theory and it is illegal to teach it as a fact in school? I mean, look, without getting into party politics too much, because I think party politics will never solve these issues, and if anything, party politics just serves to further cement these inequities and forms of oppression, without getting into too much. However, you know, I'm not really surprised to see a right-wing Tory government, you know, positing this, because it doesn't serve their interests. It doesn't serve them at all to you know, posit this as some sort of critique of the state or the status quo, right? So I'm not surprised. I think it's obviously is very problematic, the precedent it sets, and I think you know, I think it exposes the hypocrisy not just of the Tory government but the wider political establishment as well. Like often, you know, if you don't invite, like if a white supremacist or a far right kind of dude is, you know, not platformed on your campus, they'll make an issue of free speech out of it, right? And I think this issue specifically really exposes just, you know, whose free speech they really care about, and who, you know, whose free speech they're willing to take away. And in this case, they don't really. It just goes to show that they only really care about the free speech of those who seek to oppress and those who seek to cause violence and discord. So yeah, those are my thoughts in a nutshell. I could talk for hours on end around that issue. Another question from Iyad: do you think having a counter narrative to colonialism would help make the education just curriculum less likely to be colonized? I'd be interested to know what you mean by a counter narrative. To be honest, you know, I think fundamentally it is about part of decolonizing the curriculum specifically is actually about critiquing the system as well. So I think we should, you know, the very system itself, we need to critique it and challenge it and complement it, and, you know, present history for what it is. So I think that's very much how I would frame it, not so much a counter narrative, but rather frame it as presenting history and facts for how it is. This isn't a counter narrative, it's about presenting history and facts for what it is. And this isn't two sides of the debate. But yeah, that's what I would say. A couple of other comments, couple of other points. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So there's just been a couple of other comments made. Obviously, you'll will have the ability to feed into it and look into the chat. I'm probably gonna leave it there if there are no other questions. My email, my Twitter, my Instagram is there. If anyone doesn't want any resources or any other questions, drop me an email. But yeah, thanks very much for listening. I chat a lot, so thanks for bearing with. And thanks to Thomas and everyone at Birmingham Students Union, or Guilded Students rather, for inviting me and having me and organising this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adnan. That was, I think everyone in attendance will agree, that was a really interesting session. We all got a huge amount out of that. Yeah, as has been said a couple of times in the chat, we have a Discord server that we're running alongside the conference where people can discuss some of the stuff in a bit more detail. I've put all of the links to the articles that Adnan was discussing in there ready if people want to dive into those. I'll just put the link in there once again. Yeah, thanks so much, Adnan. We have been recording all these sessions and will be for the rest of the conference, so we'll make the recordings available to attendees when they are ready. But yeah, I think we're going to call it for lunch now, and we'll see everyone after the break for the next session. Cheers, guys.
Everyone, thank you.